Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline Podcast. I am your host, Shayna Terrell. I'm an educator activist committed to the work of freedom and liberation for my people. As always, I want to shout out our co-conspirators and new supporters for coming this week and watching and supporting us. We love you, we thank you, and of course, we wouldn't be able to do this show without your love and support. As always, shout out to Citizens Ed and the Center for Black Educator Development for providing this partnership and this platform to talk to real people in the real struggle doing the real work.
Yeah.
So today's theme show is of inclusivity. We're still following that theme that we did last week, but today we're going to be discussing the role of gender and race in the classroom. And I would love for you guys to welcome my guest today, Dr. Travis Bristol, to the show. I'm so excited that he will be joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Of course, Travis is an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley's Graduate School of Education. Before joining Berkeley's faculty, he was a Peter Paul assistant professor at Boston University. Dr. Bristol's research is situated in the intersection of educational policy and teacher education. Using qualitative methods, he explores three related research strands: the role of education policies in shaping teacher workplace experience and retention; 2, district and school-based professional learning communities; and 3, the role of race and gender educational settings. Dr. Bristol's research has appeared in peer-reviewed journals including Urban Education, the American Education Research Journal, the Journal of Teacher Education, the Teacher College Record, Harvard Educational Review. He is currently co-editing with Karina Gist the Handbook of Research of Teachers of Colors, which will be published by the American Educational Research Association. The National Academy of Education Spencer Foundation, Ford Foundation, and area awarded Dr. Bristol's dissertation fellowships in 2013. In 2016, he received the inaugural Teacher Diversity Research Award from the American Association of Colleges from Teacher Education in 2019. Dr. Bristol received a Ford Education Postdoctoral Fellowship and Emerging Scholar Award from the Comparative and International Education Society, African Diaspora SIG. In 2020, he received a National Academy of Education Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship. Most recently, in 2020, Dr. Bristol received the Early Career Award from ARIA Division K. He is on the board of directors for Teach Plus, the National Center for Teacher Residencies, the Albert Shanker Institute, and the East Bay School for Boys. He's a former student and teacher in New York City Public Schools and a teacher educator with the Boston Teacher Public Residency Program. Dr. Bristol received his AB from Amherst College, MA from Stanford University, and PhD from Teachers College, Columbia University. So, of course, we got to shout out Dr. Bristol for all of his work, all of his accomplishments, all of his blood, sweat, and tears into this work. So shout out to you, Dr. Bristol, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline.
Thank you, Shayna. And next time I'll give you the abbreviated version.
Listen, let the people know what you out here doing, Travis. Like, you out here working, and the people need to know, okay? Let the people know what you out here doing. But of course, I need to shout you out as a fellow New Yorker.
Yes.
You are a representative of BK.
Yes.
I'm a representative of the BX.
I won't hold it against you.
No, I'm not holding it against you. But shout out to my fellow New Yorker and all of the hard work you are putting in. And I also want to shout out Columbia University. My mom worked there for many years until she retired. So shout out to Columbia. But welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline. We're so happy to have you here and so happy to talk about your work.
Yes, I'm honored to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Definitely. So I always like to start out with talking to my guests about their journey in education. Why did you decide to become an educator?
So I decided to become a teacher. I think it's part of that bio that you mentioned. I went to high school in New York City. I think let me first start by saying I went to I know Jarvis was on your show, I think last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard Jarvis talk about his early experience and the Black teachers that he had. And I think somewhat similar to Jarvis, I went to what I would term now an Afrocentric religious school in East New York, Brooklyn. From K to 6. All of my teachers were Black. I'm dating myself here, but I remember in the first grade writing letters to the apartheid government to release Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
I learned about Nat Turner, Crispus Attucks, Frederick Douglass in the first grade. And then I go to high school, then I go to middle school, public middle school, and my school became violently Eurocentric. It's the first time in my life I heard that Christopher Columbus discovered America. I go on to high school, and the high school that I attended, because of the middle school that I attended, were both places that, one, they actually are no longer open. They were closed because of quote unquote underperformance. But they were schools that did not prepare me to be career and or college ready. I walked through a metal detector every single day, and so that I think just frames the kind of ways that the school chose to engage with me. But I did relatively well. Actually, I did really well because high school was easy. I then go on to Amherst College, this small liberal arts college in Massachusetts that I'd never heard of before I applied. And I thought I was going to become a lawyer. And it was in my second semester freshman year that I took this education course. And I learned that my experience in Washington Irving High School, walking through a metal detector, that it was in some ways very similar to Black and brown children in urban spaces across the United States. And so here I was in this really elite school, receiving what I think an exceptional education. And I knew something very personally about what it meant to go to a school where you that practice educational malpractice. And so I thought it was and saw it as almost a responsibility, an obligation to go back to the school district where I was educated. And so eventually, as you mentioned in the introduction, I went back and I taught high school in New York City for 5 years.
Got it. So your journey through education, your introduction to it wasn't until you got to college and made this connection about your responsibility to your community, and a way to come back to do that is to teach. Something I want to highlight, though, interested in what you said, when you said it wasn't until you were introduced to this violent kind of Eurocentric kind of concept when you got to school. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more for folks?
Yeah.
Because people would not describe a current institution for education as violent towards a child, but I think that's important to highlight.
Yeah. I mean, so violent in the sense that I went to a school that centered Blackness and Black people, which I think for my own identity, that was helpful. We educate most children in the country that center in ways that center white people and whiteness. That's why we tell people the lie that Christopher Columbus discovered America. He never landed foot on the continental United States, but we tell people that he discovered America. We don't problematize why Europe sits at the center and the top of a globe, even though the globe is round, right? And I went into, and so when I started middle school, right, Europe became the center of how I engage with the world. I read books by white people, and I learned that that forms of government, right, started in Europe, like democracy, right, and so my world became connected to and centered around white people and whiteness, and that was not my experience. My experience in K-6 schools was, I don't know if some of your viewers might remember those posters with the kings and queens of Africa.
Yes.
And so I remember in my elementary school seeing, right, the kings and queens of Africa, like all throughout the school building. The school was a Christian school, and so the images of Jesus, right, they were Black. I remember being shocked. Really, in college, I studied abroad in Spain, and I remember the cognitive dissonance of seeing all of these white images of Jesus, because my experience as a kid was going to a school, a Christian school, where Jesus, was maybe a few shades lighter than me. And
Right.
so to be in Europe and
But
see
he
all
was
the
brown. He was brown.
yes, right, yes, and Jesus is brown, right? I mean,
He
he
is.
is a Palestinian Jew.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes. So I think that my experience in some ways, I say, in K6 really prepared me to navigate in other institutions that have also decentered Blackness and centered whiteness. But the first introduction, because it still stands out, was hearing that this white man discovered, right? This white
Yeah.
man discovered America.
Discovered something that he never set foot on.
Yes.
But super interesting experience. I'm just imagining you as a young man going into like seeing a white Jesus. Like, who is
Mm.
that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
who is this?
Yeah.
They're like, that's Jesus. You're like, that's
Yeah.
not Jesus.
Yes.
uh,
Yes. Yes.
Whereas I just think of many of our young people who have the opposite experience. They
Mm.
have these Eurocentric perspectives
Yeah.
their entire lives. And
Yeah.
then when they come into foreign programs, somewhat like ours, our freedom schools, and they discover the truth, the actual truth,
Yeah.
what that's like.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you bring up an excellent point. So somewhat of like the experience you had or the experience that Dr. Jarvis Givens had growing up around Black people and having Black teachers
Mm.
brings out this point of importance of building out the Black educator pipeline.
Yes.
Why do you think that's so important? And how does some of the work you do really support that?
Yeah. So, as it's well documented, there is an ethno-racial mismatch between teachers and students in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that every child. I'm not saying that Black children only need Black teachers. But what I am saying is that it's that many more Black children need Black teachers, many more white children, many more Asian children, many more Latinx children need more Black teachers, because we live in a ethno-racially diverse society, and we learn, right, from others, by engaging with people who have different experiences than us, and in particular, because of this country's history with Black people and Blackness, right, and how Black people are perceived by all, right, by many people, even by Black people. It's important that we have Black teachers to begin to disrupt, right, some of those anti-Black ideas. Now, we need well-qualified, well-trained Black teachers, so not any Black teacher will do. But I think that is why we need Black teachers, and some of my research says that highlights that you're not going to get Black teachers if you suspend and expel Black children before they even enter college, right?
Facts. Yes.
Yes.
A lot of work. As you point that out, a lot of the research then points out, right? Because in order to get Black teachers, you have to educate Black children well and fairly with equity, right?
Yes.
Because the more you suspend, the more you kick out, the more students that are disengaged, you then lessen the pool of students that we actually have to choose from. Which just brings up to me right now the repeat cycle of continuing to crush our leaders. So whether it's a teacher, whether it's a doctor, like crushing the spirits of young people before they can even thrive and arrive to the notion of being a Black teacher.
Yes.
We definitely focus on this concept of inspiring young people to aspire to be teachers. So I think that is excellent that a lot of your work speaks to that. And then I also want to highlight the benefits of having a Black teacher. So how can having a Black teacher disrupt exactly what you're saying happens to Black children?
Yeah. So the evidence, and when I say the evidence, I mean the research evidence is clear. I think it's been clear for a while, right? Much of some of the early qualitative research by giants in the field like Vanessa Siddle Walker reminds us that that Black communities, right, lost a great deal during integration. Because when Black children integrated into essentially white schools, because white children didn't integrate in Black schools,
Exactly.
their Black teachers did not follow them. Their Black
Mhm.
teachers and their Black principals were dismissed. And what Dr. Vanessa Sosa Walker highlights is the rich learning communities that Black teachers created before the Brown decision, that Black teachers helped Black children navigate racially hostile communities, gave them a frame for how to move through anti-Black American society. And so much of that work Dr. Soda Walker has documented. Dr. Michelle Foster has highlighted the important roles of Black teachers on teaching, and
Mhm.
how Black teachers have shaped both some of the social and emotional experiences and created positive social and emotional experiences for Black children. More recently, with our fascination with quantifying everything and collecting data on students and student outcomes, we have found researchers have been able to link how Black children perform and the improvements that Black children have on standardized exams to having a Black teacher. So what researchers like Vanessa Soda Walker and Michelle Foster and Gloria Ladson Billings have highlighted in terms of the important role of Black teachers in creating curriculum that is engaging, we've now been able to also add, right, to the added value of Black teachers by quantifying
Mhm.
that their presence increases um, students' scores on standardized exams,
Yep.
decreases their expulsion in school,
It's-
out of school suspension. So
Yep.
that is the transformative role that Black teachers play in the lives of Black children.
Definitely. You also made a point earlier about just any Black teacher won't do.
Mm.
And I think that that's an important point for us to like harp on. But I think that the question in that would be, and I think a lot of educators wonder, like, what does quality support look like
Mm.
for the retention or the recruitment of Black teachers?
Mm.
Because I think that when we get into the conversation about having more Black teachers for Black children, I don't think that people think any old person would do, but I think that Blackness is just a qualifier, right? Like
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
folks are Black, we're gonna get them in front of some kids. Whereas if you don't have the proper training, set up, the proper professional development, and the proper support,
Yes.
then what are you getting? How
Yeah.
are you really guiding and teaching people in a framework to lead and teach Black children?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we want Black teachers to know their content. So if you are an English teacher, you should know some things about grammar. For example, you should know about how to teach reading, how to teach writing. If you are a math teacher, you should understand concepts around math, science. So teachers should know their content, and Black teachers should know how to teach that content. So just
Yep.
because you are um, uh, right, I think we've seen this time and time again when we hire business leaders to lead school districts. Just because you have knowledge in one domain doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to translate that knowledge into
So,
another domain. So we
yes.
also need Black teachers to be able to translate, to be able to use their content knowledge and know how to teach children that content. People call that pedagogical content knowledge. We also need Black teachers to understand how to uplift and disrupt anti-Black ideas, right? Um, Black teachers and Black people are breathing in the air of anti-Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
So just because you're Black doesn't mean automatically that you have been able to learn how to filter, right, that air. And so we need preparation programs that help Black teachers understand their anti-Black ideas, disrupt some of their class privilege, their gender privilege, um, some of their, for Black men, their heteronormative privilege. And so we need preparation programs that also disrupt these ideas and teach teachers, aspiring teachers, right, some more positive ways of interacting with children and Black children. And those are the range of skills that we need when I say high quality Black teachers.
Yes. And I think those are dope skills to point out. And I think that when teachers feel like they get that level of training, they get that level of support, they're much more confident to be in the classroom, much more confident to be in children, and they feel a lot more successful, which also feeds into the retention rate. But I know a lot of your work, especially your qualitative work, is based on some information and some strategies about retention, and why it's a revolving door in education for Black teachers, specifically Black men. Can you talk about some of the qualitative research that you've discovered, especially on why people leave the profession?
Thank you, Shana. I mean, I think that the so many people, rightfully so, focus on recruitment. We're getting a little bit of attention now on support, but the biggest issue is actually retention, for Black teachers in particular. Many of these recruitment efforts are paying off. We're actually seeing, I won't share the data, but
but you can share the data. Give us those numbers.
Well, the National Center for Education Statistics, right, which is an arm of the U.S. Department of Education, right, actually highlights that, in fact, we're seeing Black and Latinx teachers, their entry into the profession is actually increasing. White teachers are decreasing. So lots of these programs, right, programs that got me into teaching. I got funding from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund Foundation that paid much of my teaching. Lots of these recruitment efforts are paying off. NYC Men Teach, the fellowship, lots of these programs are actually bringing more Black people into the profession. So they're paying off. The biggest issue is that that Black teachers are leaving the profession at a higher rate, right, than everybody else. And some of the reasons why we see that Black teachers are reporting that they leave, this is some of what I found in my own research, is that Black teachers point to the working conditions in their schools. Teachers, Black teachers in particular, they're not leaving the Black students that they want, whose lives they want to transform. They're leaving their principals, right? Black teachers and teachers leave their principals, not their students. And they're leaving their principals because they're saying that their principals are creating negative working conditions that police children, that police teachers, that don't support teachers to do the kind of work that they need to do. We in this country place Black teachers, we attract Black teachers, and Black teachers are attracted to the schools that have been historically under-resourced, and we expect Black teachers to make bricks without straw, and Black teachers show up to those schools wanting to do their best work, and then they recognize that they don't have these tools and resources, the emotional support for their students, for themselves, and then they leave.
Then they go. And hey, Mama Toyin, shout out to you. Definitely, if you guys are here and you're a Black educator watching, please comment, like, and share. And also let us know the reasons why you think educators leave the profession. Let us know the reasons why you stay. Please comment that in the chat. So Dr. Bristol, this also brings up a wonderful point, like that teachers aren't leaving students, right? Because I think that sometimes there's some guilt attached to that when you are building relationships with kids and you feel like you're impacting lives, but you yourself are a whole human being.
Yes.
Right? Like you yourself are in need of support. You yourself are in need of someone to also feed your soul as well. But I think that sometimes when you're at work, people look at it as work, right? Like this is your job, do your job. And they don't look to feed the souls of teachers. One of I think it was a book called "If You Don't Feed the Teachers, They Will Eat the Children." But I think that that's an important point to lift up. So saying that to say, what responsibilities do administrators have in implementing retention strategies?
Yeah.
Like how large is their level of responsibility in this retention problem?
I would actually go a couple of levels up, right? Because administrators will say that they are creating the condition, that they too are only enacting conditions that don't allow them to support teachers, right? So I would say I would go here. One, I think we need to do a better job and a more equitable job of funding schools. That's a state legislator problem, right? So I think we need to do a better job of funding schools and particularly giving more funds to children who have been historically marginalized. Um, so that's the first piece. I also believe that as it relates to your question around administrative preparation, that we need to do some real redesign of how we prepare administrators. So some administrative programs, many administrative programs, I think, highlight lots of the technical aspects of being an administrator, and probably focus less on helping administrators understand how to navigate interpersonal relationships between teachers that are informed by essentially race and racism. So we don't help administrators in this country in our preparation programs understand that if I'm walking by a classroom and it's lunchtime and the one or two Black teachers are in their classroom and they're not in the teachers' lounge, that is characteristic.
Dr. Bristol might have froze here. But I love where he was going with this conversation, of really being able to understand teachers just beyond the technical. Dr. Bristol, you back? Travis?
I am back. Oh yeah, I don't know.
It's okay. I think you're back.
Okay. Okay. I don't
So
know what happened there.
the last part I think of what we heard, you were in the midst of telling a story about what they don't teach administrators or train administrators for. If you have two Black teachers sitting in the classroom together but not in the teachers' lounge, we're at the climax of that.
Yeah.
When you cut off.
Yeah. Well, I'll see if I can get it back, because I don't want to sound too preachy. It's not Sundays, but I think that the idea was that that we don't help administrators understand that there may be interpersonal challenges happening within the organization, within the school, and then how do you help administrators understand how to create to break down some of those walls. Those are some elements of administrative preparation that are missing, that would be important for helping Black teachers teach in a school, teach in a space that can attend to their own, that can maybe push back against some of the challenges that they have. So I think, to your question, it's one of funding, it's one of thinking about how we redesign administrative preparation. In many states, you become an administrator and that's it. You don't get ongoing coaching. Some states, teachers don't even get ongoing coaching, but we need to provide ongoing coaching for administrators to help them see all of these blind spots that they might have. And so, to your question around what can we do with administrators, and those are some of the pieces. In their preparation and in their ongoing professional development, we can support administrators to be attentive to creating these positive working conditions that will support and retain Black teachers.
Yes, I agree 100%, and I like the concept of design. I think that is super important. Even strategies with ongoing coaching and things of that sort,
yes,
it's amazing. I think that's needed, because once people are trained or they become principals, they kind of just, you're out in the world, you have your own school, go, right? There's a large lack of support for folks who are still in the field, but they still need that mentor, they still need that executive coach, or somebody they can actually come to with the very good people. Hey, I see disconnect with my Black staff, and I'm not equipped to kind of handle that issue. So who can I go to talk to about how do I create a more inclusive feeling, or how do I work on retention within my community? I think that there is tons of focus on recruitment. I get tons of calls. Hey, do you have a teacher? Being at the Center of Black Educator Development, do you have some teachers for me? Do you have Black teachers for me? But one of the things we began to talk about is retention is a part of your recruitment strategy. Don't have a teacher come to your school, feel uncomfortable, and then leave within the year, because then at that, what's the point? We're bleeding if we're bleeding Black in organizations. So your recruitment, a retention strategy, has to be a part of your recruitment strategy.
Absolutely.
You also
and those teachers are not going to go out and tell everybody else to come work in that school,
right? Or if
Yes.
their experience is so horrible, they're not going to encourage anybody else to become an educator, right? Like,
Exactly.
teacher wasn't for
Yes.
me. I hear so many,
Yes.
yeah, I taught for a couple years, but don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think what frustrates me about those type of conversations, the frustration is like misdirected and misguided, right? Like the frustration becomes about the kids. Who
Yes. Yeah.
you don't want to, not
Yeah.
today's kids. Oh no,
Yeah.
not these kids. Oh, not this generation. They say it about every generation,
Of
right?
course.
Past folks said that about us.
Right.
Now we're educators with jobs. We're
Yeah.
saying it about the next generation. But that
Yeah.
information is so misdirected, right? It's not really
Yeah.
about the kids. That's not what you're
Yeah.
frustrated with. You are
Yeah.
essentially frustrated with the system. And the
Yeah.
behavior or the response you're seeing from kids are a product, again, of the system that
Yes.
definitely needs to be rebuilt, that definitely needs to be redesigned.
Yes.
But you also bring up some excellent points about preparation. So
Mm.
preparation for administrators. But I also think that one of the questions I wanted to raise today was about teacher prep programs. And I know one of our faithful viewers, William, in the comments, he talks about this a lot on different shows. But what responsibilities do teacher preparation programs have in the recruitment and retention process for
Yeah.
Black educators?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is, yeah. So it's multifaceted. And
Mhm.
as we say in education research, is complex. But here are some things that I think education programs that I think a few of them are working on and that we need to do more of. One, I think many predominantly white institutions could learn something if they spend some time understanding how places like Howard and Spelman are training Black teachers.
Yes.
So I think that many predominantly white institutions, ones of all of which where I've worked, right, are trying to reinvent when historically Black colleges and universities, which train the majority of Black teachers.
Number one producing of Black
Yeah.
teachers.
Yes. So I think that we could do some work there. Well, I think that also thinking about in many ways, like my K-12, like my middle school experience was Eurocentric, the curriculum in preparation programs are Eurocentric. So when we prepare Black teachers, are we showing them models of Black teachers, images of Black teachers being skillful? Are we reading texts about the experiences of Black teachers? And so I think that there needs to be some work in also the content that's happening in the preparation programs. Are we reading research by Black researchers, or are we only reading research by, what we see deem as the canon, which are white researchers? So I think those are some of the ways. I think also I know that the fellowship, which is an extension of the Center for Education Development, right, that having affinity group spaces in preparation programs can also be helpful. So these are some of the myriad of ways. And I think that if you think that the K-12 teacher workforce is white, the teacher educator workforce, the people who are preparing teachers, it's even more white, right? And so
Yes.
we need more teacher educators preparing all teachers, all aspiring teachers, right? But we also aren't having that conversation. So there are very few people who look like me who are working to prepare teachers across this country.
Yes. As I've gotten deeper into this work, and a lot of times when you're having these discussions or doing this work, sometimes it is about a blame game because you're trying to find the root cause of all of this. One of the institutions that I felt like has been like teacher prep programs are somewhat let off the hook. Because I don't think the curtain is peeled back to point out exactly what you just said. You have teacher prep programs in universities around the world where their staff is all white.
Yes.
And if I'm going to be right, like essentially that's the apprentice ground, right? That's where I'm learning content. That's actually where I'm learning to form my pedagogy. And if we have a lineage of people, right? Because these people have been trained by who, right? By white people before them, and white people before them. It's like a cycle. So even if I'm a Black teacher going into this institution, this is who is helping me form my pedagogy, and helping me develop my narratives, my mindset, my biases, when I'm going to be put in front of Black children. But that is something that in doing this work that I discovered, like, we kind of whisper about teacher prep because it's kind of swept into the rug of like, we need more Black people to go to college.
Yes.
But just like we're saying, we need to recruit more Black people.
Yeah.
But then we're talking about retention being a part of a recruitment plan.
Yeah.
Of course, we need to recruit more Black teachers and recruit more Black people to go to college. But what happens to them when they get to the teacher prep program?
Yes. Yeah.
What is their experience?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So now they leave out of these institutions, us expectedly for them to be prepared.
Yeah.
And then at the same rate, they go. And now we whisper about the teacher prep program and put the responsibility on the administrator.
Yes.
Right. What are you doing to keep that teacher? Well, they went to 4 years of college, got a master's degree, and they're not prepared. So now I have to do all this backtrack of training, and now that responsibility is placed on me.
Yes.
So I definitely think that there needs to be more conversations about the responsibility of teacher prep programs. And the responsibility have to not just Black teachers, to all teachers. Because again, like you said, us being in a society that's multicultural, like white people also need preparation on responsive teaching. How can you do that? Again,
I think, Shanna, you're breaking up. So
I think we're back.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's our broadcast channel, but it's okay. The devil won't stop us today when we're talking about these truths.
Yes. We're just,
but we're,
as you know, when you just roll, you just keep on rolling, right? You just prepare for some of these things.
Yes.
You keep on rolling. Yeah.
Gotta keep on rolling. But no, but the concept of what is the responsibility of these institutions, I really, that's something I've been looking into and seeing how we can do more work and exposure on that. Because the other side of that is when we start to have these conversations about the praxis, right? And Black people being prepared to take the praxis and pass the praxis in a disproportionate rate in which they pass it. I feel like that's the responsibility of your teacher prep program.
Yeah.
To be able to have you ready. We went through all these years of school and now I'm failing the test that's supposed to prepare me to go into a field. So that's such an interesting concept to me.
Yes, it is a complex problem, and I think that we're now beginning to shine a light on teacher prep in some ways as it relates to the diversification. I should say that I spent this past year working with in the state of California where I live. We have a robust teacher residency program where we get money from the state every year, starting with Governor Brown, now with Governor Newsom. There's money in the state budget to support teacher residency programs. And I spent this year working with our teacher residency programs on exactly this question, right? Let's look at your curriculum. Let's look at the conversations that the faculty are having. Let's look at how are you speaking to your candidates of color? What kind of redesign can you do? So I think now we're really shining a light on teacher prep.
Yes, and I think that's much needed. Like there can't be a silent culprit in this travesty that's happening. Like and you get all this money, right? Like that's the other issue. They get all of this money for the education programs to prepare teachers. You have a responsibility in this issue of recruitment, retention, and preparedness for Black teachers without a doubt. So when you talk about redesign, what are some best practices that you think would help teacher prep programs to help either recruit more Black teachers or help the teachers that they currently have deliver more culturally responsive curriculum?
Yeah. So what I did with these teacher residency programs here across the state is that I have them first identify what we called an opportunity of practice, not a problem of practice, but we saw it as an opportunity to improve their teacher prep programs. And that opportunity of practice required them to actually spend some time talking to their teacher candidates. And so I think that some of this is localized. I'm seeing all questions. How do we respond? Am I supposed to respond to these questions? Or
no.
Okay.
I mean, we can. If you see one that you like, and you're like, oh, that's a good point, I want to respond to that, you definitely can. Our audience engages with us like,
okay. Okay. All
constantly.
right.
But,
I was just, it was just, I was,
I'm about to say, if you're on your own road, you got your own point, go with it. But if you see something that you're like, ooh, I want to respond to this, feel free.
okay. So yeah, no, that's helpful because I was like, well, I'm not quite sure what was going on, but so I think that very one concrete thing that many teacher preparation programs can do is to do this sort of like action research work. They can identify a problem, and they should spend time collecting data on that problem. And some of that collecting of data should be talking or surveying teacher candidates of color. I think that the second thing I mentioned this earlier, that they can look at do a review of their curriculum. So very much how we review and try to trouble the canon in K-12 schools. We should do that in teacher prep. I also think that many teacher preparation programs hire adjuncts, and the way that you get an adjunct position is that you have to know somebody who knows somebody. Well, if my social network is only white people, then the adjuncts who are going to be hired are probably going to be exactly that. So I think that particularly, it becomes challenging because of the hierarchy in higher education to sometimes get a faculty position, but adjunct positions, right? We should be going into communities and identifying, right? Well-respected, highly qualified Black teachers, right, to do some of this preparation work and hire them as adjuncts. Those are some of the very things that if a teacher preparation program, that they were serious about this, they could do this tomorrow. You could look at all of your adjuncts. You can look at the ethno-racial diversity of your adjuncts. You can try to hire more diverse adjuncts, right? And those are some concrete things. You can look at your curriculum, right? This costs $0. And with all this money coming in from the American Rescue Plan, there's a lot of money in education that universities are getting and school districts are getting, right? And that could really factor into some of this redesign.
Yes, and the fact that you pointed out some of this is at zero cost.
Zero.
So that shows what's folks' level of commitment to really helping to support and resolve this issue. Definitely. Yeah. I want to switch gears here a little bit. So a lot of time when we're talking about teacher prep, recruiting more Black teachers into the field, or this notion now that's out there about being anti-racist, we talk a lot about race. But a lot of your work also centers on gender and gender bias and how harmful that could be. Can you talk about some of the dangers of gender bias and your contributions to combat that?
Yeah. So I think I want to first say that I think a good researcher, part of doing research is also trying to problematize your own research, right? Mm-hmm. So my research, it has changed, it has evolved, but some of my original research that people most know me most about is about my research on Black male teachers. Mm-hmm. And I would say that is, it is, that as I problematize my research, that sometimes the focus on Black men can come and has come historically at the exclusion of Black women, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that there are some similarities in how Black women and Black men are positioned. But if you do all this research on Black men, and then you create all these programs for Black men, then what about Black women teachers, right?
Yes, and so speak on that, Travis.
So I think that to problematize my own research, it has focused initially on Black men, and I think that it has done that at the exclusion of Black women. And that research is true of Black boys. We do all this research, create all these policies, my brother's keeper, for Black boys and young men, at the exclusion of Black girls and Black young women, when Black girls and Black young women their outcomes in schools, right, are as challenging as Black boys if you compare Black girls to white girls, for example. So I think that the bias in my own research is that it has focused on this very narrow path. And there is some new research. There was a recent book on Black women teachers. And I think that we need to do more work in this area. But so that's one of the gender pieces. The other piece, I think, is around when we talk about recruitment programs for Black men, for example, or or support programs for Black men, we have a Morgan Freeman Black man in mind, right? And
What you mean by Morgan Freeman Black man?
who was that? Hopefully, I'm getting the reference right. Was he the principal on in?
Yes. Yes, on
Right.
Lean on Me. Okay.
Yes.
Joe
Yes.
Clark. Joe Clark.
Joe Clark, right? Joe
Yes.
Clark. So we have a Black man who, right, appears heteronormative, who carries a bat, right, and we don't make space for the range of gender diversity um, for Black men, and so we, in some ways, want a Joe Clark, and we don't want a Bayard Rustin, right, as a Black male teacher when we think about these teacher diversity efforts. And so some of the gender bias is that we have a very singular heteronormative understanding of what it means to be a Black male teacher. And then we create support programs, right, that don't talk about gender identity and the range of ways that Black men should be allowed to show up and should be supported in showing up. And so I think that, to your question, those are some of the other gender biases that exist that we need to be attending to in all of our recruitment, and particularly and more specifically our support programs.
So first I want to shout you out for like owning your own bias. Like, hey, I did this research, there's bias in my research. And there needs to be more research about how we engage with Black women in the educational space. I was talking to a friend about it the other day, and I was like, Black women and Black girls do experience some, assaults and also have a hostile relationship with education. But sometimes when you look at the numbers, it's alarming what's happening to our Black boys. So I do have an understanding of why there's a lot of focus on that.
Yeah.
So when we talk about just gender bias, period, what are some things that teachers can look out for or be conscious of in the classroom to help students be engaged to combat gender bias?
Yeah. So, I often give the story of when I was a first year teacher in New York City public schools, that my greatest challenge in my classroom, most of my students were Latinx and Black, was not with the Black boys or Latinx boys in my class. They were with specifically the Black girls in my class, not the Latinx girls, because for a lot of socialized reasons, they did not, on average, challenge me, right, in ways that the Black girls did. And I had a colleague, I had a mentor, Miriam Narain, who helped me understand that in some ways, I come from a very patriarchal culture, right, where on average, I was socialized to believe and understand that women don't challenge men. And so when I showed up in the classroom, I brought in and used and looked at my students through these same lens. And so it wasn't so the Black young women in my class were just being themselves, right? But I, because of the bias that I had, right, saw their engagement with me as being disrespect. And so I had to challenge some of my own bias as a first year teacher to that if you're sending out one Black young woman, maybe that's fine, or one Black, but if the pattern is a disproportionate rate, it's not the students, it was me. And so I had to sort of check that.
And I think that is such a dope story, but it points out so many things that happen within education because you are in a position of power. Like you are in a position to change the trajectory of the lives of those young people, all based on a singular personal bias. So even as you're seeing them and you're using the words like, some of the ways they behave, they're being themselves, but I saw it as disrespect.
Yeah.
That labeling their behavior as of disrespect then allows you to then impose these negative consequences on these young ladies for being themselves based off a singular bias that you have of them, which is the story of many. I'm glad you shared that story about Black girls, because it happens to many Black girls. It happens to many Black boys. And I don't think that educators challenge themselves enough to look at their own patterns of behavior and fight to disrupt.
So I often lead with that story anytime I talk to predominantly white teachers. I lead with that story to talk about my own bias, my own gender bias, to say that we're all breathing this air, right? And so I'm leading, starting with myself, to show that, and to show that it is almost natural. It would be unnatural, right, if you didn't have these biases given the air you breathe. And these are some things that you can do to correct. And so I often share that story as a way to help white teachers understand that it's not a magnifying glass, but a mirror, right, that they need to use.
And I think that that's an amazing, and I think that's a dope strategy for folks to walk away with. Like, evaluate yourself, check your own bias, right?
Yes.
Do your own work, do the reflection.
Yes.
And it's okay, right? And I think by sharing more stories like you just did, it so much normalizes the fact that, like, we do have bias. It's not the stigma, right? Like, even when we talk about racism, people are racist. Like, it happens. But it's what you do in response to that. It's the work that you do to combat that, which is what makes this important. So I think that was a dope story, definitely to share. And I can see how when you're working with people, it like grounds them in that.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about policy, because I know you do some policy work and some policy research. Are there any important policies that we should be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, a lot. And so let's start at the federal level. So in the American, I think, Families Act, President Obama.
Try to bring that brother back. No.
President Biden has pledged support for teacher residency programs.
Okay.
Residency programs are alternative certification programs that recruit and train a large percentage of teachers of color. The National Center for Teacher Residencies, right, is the national organization. But I think at the federal level, there is some commitment, right, from President Biden to invest in teacher residency programs. And I think NCTR becomes so that's one policy that we see on the national level. In the state of California, I currently chair the superintendent's the state superintendent's teacher diversity advisory group. We have a bill called AB 520 that is aimed at providing supports around retention and professional development for male teachers of color. The bill has passed the lower house, the assembly, and now it's moved over to the Senate. And so that is a really powerful piece of legislation that will put some real dollars and some real supports around increasing the number specifically of male teachers of color. At the local level, we have programs like in New York City, NYC Men Teach. Mayor de Blasio in 2016 committed $16 million of public money to recruit and support 1,000 men of color. The city has met that bar and it continues with its program. So those are, I think, at the federal, state, and local level, those are some, I think, policies that I think you may want to pay attention to. There's another policy in a piece of legislation in Minnesota, in Massachusetts, that are also working their way headed to the governor's desk soon, that people should also care about. So this is a real policy moment in this country, because we have lots of, before there were just these, a local school district here or a foundation. Now we're seeing codified in legislation, state policymakers saying, we can do more. And even the president saying, right, we can be investing more in this type of preparation that brings in more folks of color.
And attaching dollars to it.
Yes.
I think that's super important. So are there any other policies that we should be organizing around to possibly get removed, to help remove barriers for Black educators getting into or remaining in the field? Because I know, like, you have some new policies coming, but are there any that we need to work together to tear on down?
Yeah. So I think that one policy that we should, at least there are some programs in the state of California where you have to pass some parts of the teacher certification exam to even begin your program, right? I think that is a really harmful policy. My own story, I talk very publicly and openly about my own challenges with teacher certification exams. I almost in the state of California, I had to fly to California. I was living in Massachusetts. I had to fly to California to take this test. I took 4 of them. I needed to pass 1 of them in order to start my program. I only passed 1 of them the first time. If I didn't
Oh, wow.
pass that test, I had no backup plan. I would be graduating from Amherst College, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and I didn't have a backup plan if I didn't pass this other test, if I didn't pass this one test. Now, I spent the entire year taking that test multiple times, right, I eventually passed. But I think that the one barrier, I'm not ready yet to have the conversation about removing tests. But I
Yes.
think that there's one barrier that we can remove is that we should allow people who want to teach to enter preparation programs, and then we need to organize preparation programs to support people to pass the test, right? I mean, that's what happened when I went to Stanford, right? Linda Darling-Hammond, who was who led the education transition team for President Obama and President Biden. She was the director of my teacher prep program at Stanford, and she sat me down and said, Travis, we're going to help you pass this test. They got me a tutor who I met with once a week in the library, who helped me work on, the various parts of the test. So Stanford took it upon itself, right? Stanford has lots of resources, but I do think that we need to get rid of the entry requirement of having passed a teacher certification exam, and then once people arrive, we can do the necessary work to support them.
Again, your vulnerability is amazing. And the reason why it is because this brother got into Stanford, but then struggled to pass what we call state certification tests.
Yeah.
So then it really has this view on like, we do need to do something about that. We do need to take a look at that. And I think the way that Stanford went about that for you is phenomenal. Like, brother, we're going to help you pass this test. Because we have, and I've read your bio in the beginning, all these awards, accolades, research. It's not a question of intelligence. Like, that's just not what this is. It's also not a question of effective teaching on whether you can or cannot pass this test. That's not what it is. So I agree with you on, yes, that whole, like, get rid of the test. We're not saying that, right? There still needs to be a level of something that shows that, like, you are ready to pass the apprenticeship part of your work. Every job where you're training or you're being apprentice has that level of, like, what you would consider a reasonable certification. But this test isn't a question of intelligence. It isn't a question of capability. Then what is it a question of?
Yes.
That definitely needs to be explored. Travis, we are coming up on time today. So what I love to always do is give my guests the floor to share any final words at all with our viewers that you would like to get through.
I think that I've been talking, I appreciate your comments about vulnerability. I think it's important for Black educators and Black people to take some time to take care of themselves. We didn't create racism, and it's not our problem to fix racism in America. We need to first take care of ourselves. And so this is my last professional thing until the summer, because I'm taking the summer off. And I encourage folks in whatever space and whatever time you can, that we have to do this work for our children, for society, for other people, but we're no good to other people, society, and our children if we're not good to ourselves, right? We can't do this work if we're 6 feet under. And so I really would encourage folks, to find time to step back and to take care of yourself.
Oh, Dr. Bristol, I appreciate that message wholeheartedly. And that sat well with me, because I think sometimes when you consider yourself in the fight for freedom or the fight for liberation, and we've seen how our ancestors struggle, we feel like carry that cross, take on that same struggle. I'm willing to die for this. And we are in a sense of respect, but you do need to take care of yourself to be able to carry on the fight. So that's phenomenal advice. For me, that's phenomenal advice for our viewers and our supporters. So somebody said unplug and recharge. Yes. You can be a radical and still practice radical self-care.
They don't
I
have
like
to be
that.
mutually exclusive.
And we need to find that balance.
Yeah.
So I need to find my balance in practicing some radical self-care. So thank you for that.
Yes.
So I would like to wrap, and Dr. Bristol, Dr. Travis Bristol, thank you for joining us today on Building the Black Educator Pipeline.
Yes.
Thank you for all of the work that you are doing out there. Many, many thanks to you for joining us today. And many thanks out there to our co-conspirators and our viewers watching. We appreciate you. We love you. And again, without your love and support, we wouldn't be able to do this. But thank you for supporting real people in a real struggle, doing the real work. We will see you guys back here next week, Thursday at 12 for another edition of Building the Black Educator Pipeline.